again, thanks everybody for joining us. And while we're waiting for everybody to get logged on, we can make a few quick announcements. So just a brief reminder, we have this month, at the end of this month, we have the PHIND seed funding opportunity will be due. So hopefully some of you are going to be applying. Look forward to reviewing your proposals. Just a reminder, so this one is for PIs. So a team of PIs looking for a couple different disciplines combined, and this is a 200K 2-year award. So really looking forward to what you come up with here. And the other award, which is also on the same timeline, is the Sanjeev Sam Phillips Fellowship. And so this one will be a 1-year fellowship in precision health. And we're looking to fund 2 fellows this year. So we're really excited to see who applies, and we really had a great talent pool last time. So I think it'll be another great cycle for us. I want to thank everyone that was able to attend the PHIND mini retreat. I know we're virtual today, and we've kind of been off and on virtual from different aspects, and so it was great to have whoever was available to come together. And there's a lot of great discussions thinking about the different areas to build out in precision health, and hopefully this also was helpful in facilitating some collaborations and moving into this funding cycle as well. So we'll probably have more of these, and really enjoyed chatting with everyone in their different domain areas. Just one last announcement before we get to our speaker. So our upcoming seminars, we have one from one of our current PHIND fellows, Hannah, and then next we will have another PHIND seed project will give an update on their progress. So we're looking for that coming up in the next talks. But for today, we're really excited to have Anthony Crimarco. Very interesting talk. I know myself, I've been very interested to see the outcomes of this study as soon as I saw it come in, I think for a variety of reasons. And so it's a really interesting area. Anthony is a research program manager for Stanford University's Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. His focus area of research includes diet and lifestyle interventions, the benefits of plant-based diets, and M-health and e-health. He received his PhD in health promotion, education, and behavior at the University of South Carolina in 2019, and completed a T32 postdoctoral fellowship at the Stanford Prevention Research Center in 2021. His talk will be assessing the effects of alternative plant-based meats versus animal meats on biomarkers of inflammation, a secondary analysis of the swap meat randomized crossover trial. So I'll turn it over to you, Anthony, and thanks so much.
Thanks for the introduction, Ryan. So I'm just going to share my screen. I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint file. Let's get it to, is that looking okay for everybody?
Yes, it looks good. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. All right, so good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending my presentation today. So, I know Ryan had just introduced me a minute ago. My name is Anthony Crimarco. I'm a research program manager here at Stanford University. And today I'm going to be talking to you guys about plant-based meats or alternative plant-based proteins. And, this has become somewhat of a hot topic in public health nutrition. And the title of my specific project today is called Assessing the Health Effects of Alternative Plant-Based Meats on Inflammatory Biomarkers. So this was a secondary analysis of the Study with Appetizing Plant Food Meat Eating Alternatives trial, or SWAP meat for short. So this was a clinical trial that we had conducted a couple of years ago here at Stanford. And in this study, we looked at the health effects of when adults substituted various animal meats with plant-based meat products. And I'll go into all of those details and specifics in the next set of slides here. And so just in terms of an outline for today's agenda, I'll do some introductions, provide some background information, and summarize the results of the original study, because I think it helps to have an understanding of those initial results and it sets up, the hypothesis for the current work I'm going to talk to everybody about today. And then, of course, I'll talk about the secondary analysis and then wrap up with some discussions, conclusions, and acknowledgements. So, just a little bit about myself. I am a research program manager for Stanford University's residential and dining enterprises, as well as the Menus of Change collaborative. And if you're wondering, the Menus of Change collaborative, it's a large network of researchers from all around the globe that are working together to do work that's focused on both healthy eating and sustainability. And then just in terms of my education and background, I come from a business and public health background, and I recently completed my postdoc here at Stanford's Medical School at the Stanford Prevention Research Center. And the work that I'm going to be presenting today, I worked on that during the second year of my postdoc. I also just wanted to introduce Dr. Christopher Gardner. He was a principal investigator of the swap meat study, and he was my mentor in this project as well as my postdoc career. And I'm just going to start us off with some, initial definitions and background information. So, plant-based meats or alternative plant-based proteins, they are, broadly speaking, vegan or vegetarian products that are designed to resemble the taste and appearance of traditional animal meat. And so the ingredients, are from plant sources, and they're designed to replace conventional animal-based sources. And if you've ever been to any of the dining halls on campus, you may have noticed that the dining halls do offer some plant-based meat products. So, for example, we have like the plant-based burger. They also have like some plant-based chicken products, but the dining halls also offer other, healthy vegan and vegetarian options. And the reason for that is, I would say within the last few years, the consumer, demand and interest in plant-based meats have really taken off. And I think what's interesting is that, some plant-based meat products have been on the market for years, right? I think some examples that might come to your mind are like the Morningstar burgers, or, I'm originally from the East Coast in Florida, and we had like the Boca burgers that were introduced into the shelves of supermarkets. But it really hasn't been, within the last few years that there's been a lot of demand and interest for these products. And so if I had to break it down for sort of, the primary reasons, it's these three listed up here. So one, the producers of plant-based meat products themselves, they have definitely improved the taste and the texture of the products to more closely resemble animal meat. And that's significant because taste is one of, if not the most strongest determinants of food choice. So, simply put, if, foods taste good, people will eat them, right? And secondly, more consumers have become interested in plant-based diets in general. Then the third reason too is there's been a lot of research documenting the potential environmental benefits of plant-based meats in terms of if enough consumers were to adopt them as a part of their regular diet and substitute them in place of animal meats. And I'll show just like some quick examples here. So, the foods that we choose to eat not only affect our health, but they affect the environment, right? So different food products have different carbon footprints. And so like this chart here on the left is just a very quick example. And you can see like right away that, a lot of the animal products, particularly beef and red meat, tend to have the highest carbon footprint. But the plant-based products, including some plant-based meats, tend to have a lower carbon footprint because they use, like less water and resources to produce the products. However, there have also been, concerns raised about, plant-based meats, and mainly because a lot of the products are considered to be highly processed. And when I talk about food processing, I'm just getting at the fact when additional ingredients are added to the food products to either enhance the flavor or the texture of them. And so, for example, on the left here, this is an example of many studies that looked at sort of the nutritional content of plant-based meats, right? So this particular study was done by some researchers in the UK, and they had come to the conclusion that a lot of the plant-based meat products exceed the recommended dietary guidelines in terms of the sodium content, and that's because the products are highly processed. And what's also interesting too was, in addition, to researchers, there've also been, like interest groups that raised concerns for plant-based meats. So this example here on the right, this was actually an ad that was ran from an organization called the Center for Consumer Freedom, but they're actually like an interest group that represents, the meat industry and some fast food chains. So, naturally it's in their interest to be outspoken against them, but they have an entire website that's actually dedicated to criticizing plant-based meats. And this is just one of many examples. So this also not shown on this slide, there have been like a number of ads in like major newspapers that you might have seen from different interest groups on this topic. So it's really, just fascinating. And let's talk a little bit more about, like the food processing. So here's just a hypothetical example with a Beyond Burger and 80/20 ground beef. And I just chose these two particular products as hypothetical examples since they're the most, popular in their respective categories. But first, let me just direct your attention on the right. So if you look at, like the back of the nutrition label, you would see that right away that, the Beyond Burger, it has like a lot of added ingredients, right? And the ground beef does not. But if you scrutinize like the nutrition facts a little bit more, you also might notice that there could be some potential benefits, right? So like the burger has the plant-based burger has slightly less saturated fat than the ground beef, and it does have some fiber, whereas we know that animal meats do not. And yes, it does have like a higher sodium content since it is more processed. But I wanted to point out these particular differences right now, because when I get to the results and show you the dietary adherence, you'll actually see that these small differences actually did in fact make a difference in terms of like their CVD outcomes. And I'll talk more about that in the next set of slides here. And so, kind of, all of the interest in plant-based meats and, maybe the speculation or even background noise, for like a lack of a better term, that's what got us interested in doing this study. Because at the time, although there'd been a lot of research that were published on the potential environmental benefits of plant-based meats, we still didn't really have strong data looking at the health effects from plant-based meats. And so that's what gave us the impetus to do the swap meat study, which was a clinical trial we did here a couple of years ago. So in terms of like the study design of swap meat, it was a randomized crossover trial. Participants were randomized to do two different dietary phases. So they were instructed to consume 2 or more servings per day of either plant-based meat products or 2 or more servings per day of animal meat products. So for the first 8 weeks, participants would start off with one of those dietary phases, and then after week 8, they would cross over and simply substitute the products. So otherwise, they were instructed to keep the rest of their dietary habits the same. So, for example, if they're eating their burgers in a whole wheat bun, then, we ask them keep, eating the plant-based meat in a whole bun as well, just so that the diet is as consistent as possible, and the only notable changes would be due to the substitution of the plant-based meat products. And I'll show us the results of the dietary adherence too. And then we had these are all of our measures. So we did, their lab work. We actually did some stool collection for their microbiome, as well as several questionnaires, and we collected their dietary information as well. If you're wondering why we had chosen 2 servings per day, there is some epidemiology literature that indicates that, in the U.S. diet, typically American adults consume as much as 9 ounces of meat per day, which is the equivalent to about 3 servings. So we felt it was actually reasonable to, expect our study participants to consume at least 2 or more servings per day. And we'll talk about that some more as well. And so the results of the original study, they have been published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. It is available online, and it is open access now, so you should have access to the full-length article. And so I wanted to start off here with showing you like a breakdown of all of the products that we used in our study. So these charts just show you what a single serving of each of the plant-based meat products as well as animal meat products are. So at the top, this is the chart for all of the plant-based meat products that we used in our study. And at the bottom is the animal meats. And I would say, if you look at like the last 3 columns here with the saturated fat, fiber, and the sodium, you can kind of just eyeball it and see that there's some differences, right? So the plant-based meats, they do appear to have a little less saturated fat than the animal meats. And they have some fiber, whereas the animal meats do not. And then again, they do have higher sodium content as well. But we did kind of put some footnotes here for some of the animal meats like the ground beef or the chicken breast, for example. We know that our study participants, they tend to add, salt and seasonings to them, which might affect the sodium content. And when I show you the dietary adherence, that's definitely the case. Like you'll see that the sodium levels were actually pretty similar between the two dietary phases. And so here is just a summary of the main results of the original study. So I highlighted the variables where we noticed significant differences. So this first variable here is called trimethylene N oxide, or TMAO for short. You can think of it as like a marker of inflammation, but I'm going to go into a lot more details about what TMAO is, because it will help to like explain our hypothesis for the secondary analysis. But just to initially look, you notice that during the 8 weeks that participants were substituted to plant-based meats, their TMAO values were 2 units lower on average. And they actually experienced a modest weight loss as well, which is pretty interesting because this was not a weight loss study. We were not starving anybody. They could eat as much calories as they wanted. They just had to adhere to the servings of meat per day. And although 1 kilogram of weight loss is not, maybe a large amount of weight, it's based on how small the p-value is. That tells us it's pretty consistent across those 36 participants, right? And the other major variable that changes was their LDL cholesterol, their so-called bad cholesterol. It was about 10 units lower on average during the 8 weeks that they were having the plant-based meats. And then blood pressure, you can see it was pretty much the same between the two dietary phases. And as I kind of hinted a minute ago, that's because the sodium content was actually pretty similar between the two dietary phases. So I just wanted to show everybody the graphs of the dietary adherence. And I know initially this looks like a very busy slide, but I will walk everybody through this. But if you want like a quick answer, I think the participants, they experienced improvements in several CVD risk factors because of the simultaneous decrease in saturated fat, as well as an increase in fiber, right? And those are two things that are known to lower our LDL cholesterol. So in terms of the dietary adherence, firstly, the caloric intake between the two dietary phases, was pretty similar. So overall, participants were averaging between 1,400 to 2,500 calories per day, and it was not significantly different between either of the two dietary phases. And that's what we wanted, right? We wanted to make sure that the energy intake was similar. And so a pair of these panel graphs, the way to like interpret them is, firstly, the gray bars represent the 8 weeks that participants were eating the plant-based meats, and then the black bars represent the 8 weeks they were eating the animal meats. And where it says on the left overall, that's, in this case, for example, of sodium, that's how much daily sodium intake they were having. So between the two dietary phases, they're averaging about 3,000 each, which is above the RDA value of 2,400 milligrams. And then in the middle where it says product, this is specifically the sodium from either the plant-based meats or the animal meats. Then the graphs on the right that say non-product, though, that's the sodium content from all of the other dietary sources. So the numbers in the middle plus the numbers on the right sum to like the totals here. And so, I'm just going to point out like the p-values. So as I mentioned, earlier, the saturated fat was significantly lower during the plant-based phase by 7 grams. And a lot of that difference is due to the fact when the participants substituted the plant-based meats, because they were having 5 grams of saturated fat less than when they were having the animal meats. But we do have to acknowledge that they were also getting a little bit less saturated fat from other sources as well, because if this was sort of the textbook definition of perfect dietary adherence, all of the graphs on the right would be exactly identical. So that way, any differences observed in the totals would be solely due to the products. But of course, as you could imagine, it's hard to get perfect dietary adherence, especially in like behavioral interventions. But we still got very strong adherence overall. And then, as I just mentioned a minute ago, they were getting more fiber because of the plant-based meats, right? So they were getting about 5 grams of more fiber per day than they were from the animal products. And then with protein, you can see it was pretty much identical between the two dietary phases. Our study participants didn't have much trouble meeting or exceeding the RDA value for protein because it's 50 grams for adults. And now I'm going to talk to us a little bit about TMAO, just so that we can have a better understanding of what that is. So it is a molecule that's basically generated in our gut. And there's been a growing body of research that shows an increased association between higher plasma TMAO values and an increased risk for developing heart disease. And we know that diet does affect our TMAO levels. And animal meats, particularly red meats, tend to have a high content of carnitine and choline, which eventually get metabolized in our gut to become TMAO. And here I have some studies that looked at some of the effects of like diet and TMAO. And this first study here by Wang and colleagues, they actually did a clinical trial that looked at participants who ate mostly white meats for 4 weeks, or another group that ate mostly red meats for 4 weeks. And interestingly, it was only the red meat group where they had a significant increase in TMAO. So we know, pretty certainly that red meat does tend to increase our TMAO values. And in terms of just a general process, I want to point out that we still don't know the full mechanisms of it yet, but generally speaking, when you consume a lot of animal products, particularly red meat, as that's the choline and carnitine content gets metabolized in our gut, and the initial product that's generated is something called trimethylene, TMA. And then the TMA gets further oxidized in the liver to eventually become TMAO. And as I had mentioned earlier, TMAO there's more research showing an increased association of TMAO and heart disease. And on the left here, this was just an example just to show you that there have been a number of research articles also showing you this association between TMAO and inflammation, in addition to heart disease. And because of our participants got significant improvements in their TMAO values, that's what led to this present study. We wanted to know if there would be other improvements in inflammatory biomarkers, and so that's what led to this secondary analysis. And in terms of what we did is we had participants, their blood samples were archived, and we'd sent them out to this company called Olink, which is a proteomics platform that allows researchers to analyze various biomarkers of minimal sample volume. And the particular panel that we used was the inflammation panel, and it includes 92 different inflammatory biomarkers. And we'd hypothesized that based on the results of participants having beneficial CVD improvements in the 8 weeks they were having the plant-based meats, we also hypothesized that they would have improvements in some markers of inflammation. And so in terms of our analysis, we selected 6 biomarkers to be considered for our primary analysis, and the other 86 were treated as a secondary analysis, just so that we don't go on like a fishing expedition, for a lack of a better term. But we justified selecting these particular biomarkers based on the fact that there have been a number of review articles that looked at plant-based dietary patterns and inflammation, and these are some of the most commonly tested ones, and ones where we expect to see changes. So like a lot of like the interleukin ones, for example, often do change when people eat a healthier plant-based diet. And I do want to point out, like in brackets and in boulder, that are available within the Olink platform, because there are other biomarkers like C-reactive protein that often do get tested in studies, but it's not available within the Olink platform. And for analysis, we did linear mixed effects models just to assess for those changes in biomarkers between the 2 dietary phases. So overall, these are the results of the linear mixed effects models on the 6 primary biomarkers. And as you can see, none of them reached statistical significance. And in terms of the other 86 biomarkers, which I'm not going to show here because I can't squeeze that into a PowerPoint slide, only 4 of them reached statistical significance. And even then, they all just increased regardless of diet order or diet phase. I think, if you factor in the false discovery rate, then it would be pretty fair to say that the findings were null overall. And so right now we're getting ready to submit a manuscript based on these results. And in the discussion section of the manuscript, as we kind of talk about, why these findings might be so, I think we came up with sort of 2 primary possible explanations. So the first one being is that maybe, 8 weeks of substituting plant-based proteins is simply not enough to change inflammation. And interestingly, in one of the review articles, the researchers specifically noted that they didn't really notice any detectable changes in biomarkers of inflammation until 6 months or more. So it simply could be, 8 weeks is not enough time yet. On the other hand, plant-based, we also had concluded that maybe plant-based meats by themselves are not sufficient to change biomarkers of inflammation. Perhaps, that, because when I talk about a plant-based dietary pattern, I'm talking about, like an overall healthy dietary pattern is outlined from the dietary guidelines. And we know that certainly improves biomarkers of inflammation, but maybe the plant-based meats by themselves do not. And just to give you guys an idea of the numbers, in terms of like the amount of calories they were having from the plant-based meats, it was about 26%, from each dietary phase. So that could also, factor into it, that perhaps you need to make much more dietary changes to experience those improvements in inflammation. And so, for the conclusion, section, that we just noted that within 8 weeks of participants substituting the plant-based meats over the animal meats, there were a number of beneficial changes in CVD risk factors, but there were no changes in the biomarkers of inflammation. But I do think, future work should definitely consider like a longer time period, just to see, if maybe beyond 8 weeks, if we do start to see some other beneficial changes. And I want to, kind of acknowledge, some strengths and limitations for our study. So I think we got, good dietary adherence. You guys saw the graphs earlier. We had minimal missing data. And I do have to, of course, acknowledge some of the limitations too, right? We had a fairly modest sample size. We had 36 general healthy adults. And in this study, we only used one formulation of plant-based meat products. So we were using the Beyond Meat products in this study, but we know that, of course, there are a number of different products with different ingredients and formulations. And then just another limitation, most of our participants were eating like 80-20 ground beef, for example. We realized that if the majority of them were maybe eating leaner cuts of red meat, the changes in CVD risk factors might not have been pronounced, right? Particularly with like the LDL cholesterol. Although, if you look at retail sales of ground beef products, the most popular selling product among consumers is by far the 80-20 ground beef. I know, like when I analyzed all the dietary data, we did have participants, some of them were eating leaner versions like 90-10, and I think one person was eating 95-5, but the majority of them were eating the 80-20 ground beef. And then lastly, other than us being able to control the servings of meat products that they were having, the rest of their diet was self-selected. So that meant that they could eat anything that they wanted. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because that's also good for external validity, right? It means your findings are more kind of, attributable to the real world. And so I just want to get in some like quick acknowledgements. So firstly, we want to acknowledge the, Stanford University's Precision Health and Integrated Diagnostic Center for making this work possible, because without their support, this would not have been possible. I also want to thank, like all of my co-authors that helped me write the original manuscript that's been published in AJCN. And also, we want to acknowledge like a number of individuals that helped with either data collection or managing the study or giving us feedback on the manuscript. Because, to do a very well-controlled study like this, it really does take a lot of effort and people and moving parts, and all of these individuals up here really helped out as well. And we want to, of course, acknowledge Beyond Meat. They did provide their products to help support this study, and we also had a local company up the road in San Fran that provided the animal meat products, and it was an organic foods delivery service. It was actually, good quality products that they provided us with. And I would like to, of course, thank Dr. Gardner, for mentoring me, not only on this project, but of course my postdoc career. And we're actually still collaborating together. So it's cool. We're still doing lots of fun work. And then I'm going to just like finally end on this note, and then I'll open it up for some Q&A. But, it's interesting. The National Institute of Health recently issued a strategic plan. They talked about the need to have more dietary interventions that are focused on precision nutrition. And that's just getting at the fact that, all of us respond to diets differently, right? For example, all of us right now, we could be eating, let's just say a low carbohydrate diet or whatever it is, and we weigh it and we have all the numbers exactly as we want them to be. And it's very likely all of us might get different results. And so there is this need to really focus on tailoring like individual nutrition interventions. And this article came out just last month that says the NIH has is providing like a lot of funding to do nutrition interventions based on this topic. And I think it's cool that here at Stanford, we already have a resource that is dedicated to precision health. And so I think in the next few years, we will see some really exciting, dietary interventions that are really focused on more of like individually tailoring the diet uniquely to the individual. So all this just to say, I think it's an exciting time to be in nutrition research. And I think it's awesome that we have like, the PHIND organization here that's already focused on that. So with that said, I'm gonna say thanks, everybody for like listening to me. And now I'm gonna open it up to Q&A. I think I did see something in the chat, so I'm just gonna catch up and read here.
For sure. Thanks so much, Anthony. Really interesting talk, and it's great to see the results of this. So yeah, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you, or feel free to write your questions in the chat and the Q&A, I should say. Daniel, please go ahead with your question. Yeah, but then you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Unmute.
Are you able to unmute, Daniel? Oh, there we go. Oh wait, no, sorry. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So, please, Daniel, go ahead.
Did you hear me?
We can hear you now.
We can hear you now.
Oh, okay. So, excellent presentation. Other factors affect inflammation markers such as activity levels and gender. And I wonder if you had controlled for those in your analyses.
Yeah, great question. We did control for their physical activity. We used the IPAC, which is like a validated questionnaire. And yes, I did check to see if participants' physical activity levels had, changed at any point throughout the intervention, but it was actually fairly consistent. And I'd forgotten, I didn't give a breakdown of the demographics, but the majority of our participants were female. I'm going to say like as much as like 70 or 80% of them were female. And, they had, as I pointed out, they had no trouble, exceeding like the RDA value for protein or anything like that. And I think the caloric intake being between 14 to 2,500 is, it's pretty, I think, standard and expected for healthy adults. So yes, we did, but to quickly answer your question, we did assess their physical activity levels as well.
We also showed in a recent analysis that the patient's income levels affected C-reactive proteins and other inflammatory markers. And so it was only the lower income patients that were able to show in Haynes analysis the effect on C-reactive protein. So I think it's multifactorial, and I think you have to consider all these other factors, income and activity and gender in an analysis of markers for inflammation, as well as the duration of your intervention. So lots of work needs to be done. Excellent start.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I should point out too that we did recruit our participants locally, and I'm aware that the demographics here in Palo Alto can certainly be different than say other areas in the Bay and so forth. But yeah, that's definitely like a good point.
Thank you.
Let's see. I guess I'll ask the question while we wait for others to think about what they might have. Yeah, you ended with something I was going to ask you about in terms of kind of the precision type of interventions here. So, I mean, I can imagine that in a couple different levels. I mean, you can know, like, people know they need to exercise and eat healthy and do those things, but then there's the other kind of types of like predisposition that they can't always control as well. Maybe you could kind of highlight some of, the trends that are known currently and like, what your thinking is on that.
Yeah, so when we talk about like precision nutrition, there is a lot of individual variability among us and how we respond to diets. And actually, I can use myself as an example. So I'm an identical twin. My brother and I, we have the same DNA, but if we choose different dietary patterns, there are likely going to be differences in our CVD outcomes, our biomarkers of inflammation, just based on the types of foods that we eat or the types of dietary patterns that we adhere to. But I think one of the reasons why we're really interested in this is, in a lot of like the weight loss studies, for example, let's just for example, just like a low carb diet versus a low fat diet. There are some people that just get amazing results in one diet, and then others that just don't. And then there are others who are like, oh, the low fat diet works better for me than the low carb diet. And someone else might say the complete opposite. So it's really just having like a better understanding of why, we respond so differently. But if I had to guess, factors like our microbiomes, definitely have an impact. And I know the research on like the gut microbiome in humans is still a relatively new and emerging field, but I think having just a better understanding of all of that will certainly give us a better understanding of how and why individuals respond differently to diets. But I think though, even beyond that, we don't have all the answers yet. Like we're actually still learning a lot about precision nutrition in general.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm just very curious. So it seems like a big opportunity to look into, and I'm glad you're thinking about it. And you also, the other thing I was curious about was the microbiome. You also, I think it looks like Justin is involved in this study as well. So how, I mean, it might not be a fair question to ask, so I'm just curious, like, have you guys looked into, how this changes the microbiome if you were to substitute the meats to the plant-based diet?
Yeah, I should have pointed out. Yeah, so the Sonnenbergs and their group, they were awesome, and they did help us do all of the microbiome data collection. So in the original study, we did a 16S analysis, which I want to, it's kind of more of a, I don't want to like maybe like more of a crude or descriptive measure, and we know there weren't any. We actually didn't find any differences in sort of the diversity of species in the microbiome, but there is other research, I know, for example, that does indicate that, individuals that are on plant-based diets, particularly vegan diets, which is, the strictest type, they tend to not produce TMAO values. And like the researchers in this one particular study, they even described it as a so-called, vegetarian microbiome. And we'd also wondered about that too, if it's possible that their TMAO values decreased because they're getting the majority of their nutrients and calories from plant-based sources, that it sort of disrupts the process where like the choline and the carnitine get metabolized. But yeah, I think if we could do this again, I really would love to have done a more sophisticated like microbiome analyses. But as you could imagine, it's very expensive to do that kind of stuff. But I think it could give us some more answers in that regard.
Yeah, it looks like Christopher just added that you have ongoing work in that area, and so yeah, I mean, you have to start somewhere, and it looks like you have a great start and a lot of really interesting data to like springboard off of. So the other thing you mentioned that I was curious about was the different products. I'm certainly not looking to pit the different products against each other, but I guess without knowing a lot about the space, how different are they? Like in terms of formulation, like would you get a different result if I were to try, I don't know, someone else's product, for instance?
That's a good question. So I think the quick and easy answer is we don't know, but I will say this. So for example, the Beyond Meat products, they're primarily like pea protein that they use to make them. And I know like the Impossible Burger, they use like the soy protein, because I think for their particular product, they do that because their products have heme iron, which is normally only bioavailable from animal meat, but they use something with the soy to make it like a novel heme iron. So it's still vegan, but it allows you to have a more bioavailable form of iron. But I think, again, so I can't say with certainty if like, if you choose this manufacturer's particular product, it would be any different than the other one. But I would just go highlight back to the changes in diet quality. Remember, the plant-based meats, you're getting a little bit of fiber, and even though 2 to 3 grams of fiber might not seem like a lot, when you're eating 2 or 3 servings per day, you're suddenly getting, you know, like 6 or 9 grams additional in your diet that you otherwise would not have been having it if you were just eating like the animal meats. So I certainly think that the fact that they have like, you know, fiber in them and these other things, that's beneficial. But I know, again, you know, like what I'd said earlier, but if they were eating like much leaner animal meats, I'm not sure if their changes in CVD risk factors would have been as pronounced. But yeah.
Sure. Yeah, you know, it's very interesting just to hear about it because I'm not as familiar with this field. I tried some of the products, and actually, I mean, like I was telling you earlier, it's kind of impressive how good they taste, you know, when, you know, compared to like regular meat. The other question I had was, you know, you mentioned there's a study that they went out 6 months. I think you mentioned yours is 8 weeks. I think it's encouraging that you saw, you know, results even in this relatively short time frame. I mean, is there, I guess the other way I think about it is there like, I mean, there's probably like a certain point where it kind of plateaus, like I would get the benefit of the, you know, what is that expected to be? Because I'm sure, you know, it'll probably vary in terms of being able to see all the signals, but, you know, when do you think, is it like a year time frame? If I continually did this, is it shorter than that?
Oh, that's a good question. I think as usual, like it sort of depends, you know, where you're
Sure.
starting from and what your sort of your original diet might have been. But I know I think it would be, actually, that's something I would like to know too. Like if you go beyond 8 weeks, do you continue to get like a decrease in your cholesterol? Or does it just sort of level off? Can't say if there's any like magical timeline, but I know with like a lot of the weight loss interventions, for example, where weight is the main outcome, usually people tend to plateau after about 6 months, but I'm just specifically talking about in the context of weight. But with CVD risk factors, not so much. And I think, oh, I think Christopher was making a comment on that. Okay, so for most current change rate. Okay, yeah. So I think again, it just depends. I know people hate like getting like vague answers like that, but the truth is that's how nutrition works. You know, it's not like a black or white thing. Everything is sort of like on a spectrum, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. So yeah, I think it is what it is, right? The answer is not going to be a binary thing. And I think it's actually quite encouraging, like, you know, these time frames that you're showing improvement. I think it'll be motivating to people to know that, oh, in 2 weeks, I can expect to see something, and then it'll get them hopefully to stay with it.
And that's one thing I will say in all of our behavioral interventions, you know, people, they want results fast. And I think like, you know, when they, you know, if they see their lab work or they see their body weight changing, that's a very like powerful motivating factor. Because actually, you know, Christopher and I, we've been wanting to like explore the concept of kind of diet fatigue, for a lack of a better term, where, you know, the people are on this healthy diet and then about 6 months into it, they getting bored of it, they're not getting any more results. Like, how do you keep them motivated? And we're still trying to like find like an answer to that, but it's a common issue in really all like behavioral weight loss interventions as a whole.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. It looks like Daniel had another comment about with what Mike Snyder's lab is working on in terms of phenotypic groups and thinking about what that means in terms of standardized meals. Yeah, so are you working with his group at all, or thinking about leveraging some of the things he's doing?
I think there's just been some like conversations, like not I know like Christopher does know him. Like I actually haven't had the opportunity to meet him yet, but hopefully there will be like an opportunity for like a future collaboration.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to look into, so you don't want to distract from your efforts, but it totally makes sense. I guess, you know, and so what are you planning for like the next phase of things? What would you like to do?
Yeah, so actually, I know like Christopher is on the call too. Like he actually had one of his master's students do a sort of swap meet athlete study, and like in short, that was looking at just the effect of different, like a tradition, like the standard American diet, and one diet that included the plant-based meats, and then a traditional kind of whole food, healthy plant-based diet, and they looked at it from performance, because I think a lot of the times, you know, with sort of the interest in plant-based diets or plant-based meats, usually the narrative that I hear is like, well, from a public health point of view, it's great, but what about, athletes and people that perform at a high level? Would like substituting, plant-based proteins impact their performance? And I know in her study, it didn't. Like they recruited like 12 runners and 12 resistance trainers, and okay, not Division I athletes, but very experienced athletes. They've been training, for 5+ years, and I know that they looked at things like, their bench press and all of their 1-rep maxes and more endurance activity like the 12-minute run. And in either scenario, it didn't matter. But I think I point that out because I would like to see more studies that look at it from the context of optimizing health and not just minimizing risk. So the whole, idea with performance and athletes, I think it would be cool to do an even larger study and recruit like a large pool of athletes to see if we can, what happens when you like eat like mostly plant-based meats or just mostly traditional plant-based foods, like what effect does it have on your health and your performance, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. Any other questions for Anthony? We certainly had been having a lively discussion, but maybe others feel free to jump in as well.
And I can, of course, too, like share the PowerPoint slides if people are interested in getting them.
Oh, okay, that's helpful. Yeah. Any other questions, anyone? Well, all right. Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing, what comes next. And I think, this was a really great, interesting. I think I was interested, like I mentioned, I was interested as soon as you submitted this. I can't wait to see the results. And so really thanks for sharing that with us today, and wish you the best of luck as you, continue characterizing more about these plant-based meats.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I really enjoyed doing this, and like I appreciate you guys like having me, and like and thanks like everybody who came to my presentation today.
Great. Well, thank you everyone, and you have a great day. Thanks, Christopher, for all your feedback as well.